Welcome to part 33 of our series, Secrets of Glessner House. In this installment, we will investigate the south wall of the courtyard, an essential component of that space, but not originally part of Glessner House itself. The south wall, indicated with the red arrow, appears to be a natural part of the courtyard when standing in that space. But this aerial view shows nothing behind the wall, leading one to wonder why there is such a tall wall on this side. To understand the evolution of that wall, we start with a look at the houses that previously occupied the site of the Glessner House and the adjacent Keith House. Completed in 1858 for the Hitchcock and Galloway families, the three-story double houses are shown in the right half of this illustration and shared a party wall. The blue star on this map shows the Hitchcock house that was acquired by the Glessners in March 1885. The Galloway house, indicated by the yellow star, was purchased by O.R. and Mary Keith in February 1886. The next month, the Glessners and Keiths filed quitclaim deeds clarifying the exact dividing line between their properties. Construction on both houses commenced soon after, and was completed by the end of 1887. Here we see a view of Prairie Avenue, taken by George Glessner the following year. Note how the Keith House, with 3 floors of living space, is taller than the Glessner House, emphasizing the verticality of the Keith House and the horizontality of the Glessner House. This map shows the plan of the 2 houses, along with the Wheeler House immediately to the south. It is not quite correct, as it shows a small space between the walls of the Glessner and Keith houses, when in fact they abutted each other. But it clearly shows how the north wall of the Keith house was intended to serve as the south wall of the Glessner courtyard. In fact, the 2 families agreed to use the same Chicago common brick on the north wall of the Keith house to match the other walls of the Glessner courtyard. The Keith House was designed by the firm of Cobb and Frost and featured a stone facade in the Romanesque style, although distinctly different from the Glessner House. This floor plan shows the first floor arrangement with its circular library and large music room along the south side, and the dining room at top, with windows facing into a small courtyard. Of specific note is the fact that there are no windows in the main part of the house opening north into the Glessner courtyard. The north side of the Keith house was largely taken up with stairs, a bathroom, and a pantry. The rear stable, not shown in the floor plan, did have several windows facing into the Glessner courtyard, directly across from the Glessner's own stable. To provide adequate light for the main staircase in the Keith house, a large skylight was installed directly above, as shown by the red arrow in this 1960s aerial view taken by Richard Nickel. Skylights are a common feature of row houses to bring light into the middle portion of the building. There are very few images of the Glessner House courtyard that clearly show the south wall, probably because it was simply a large brick wall that over time was completely covered with ivy. This image from the 1890s shows Fanny's paid companion, Miss Violet Scharf, with the Glessner Skye Terrier Hero. There are no visible window openings on the south wall, and strips of wood can be seen nailed into place to train the ivy. This is the only known photograph that specifically shows the south wall being used as the background. Taken in 1900, it shows George's wife Alice on the left with their daughter Elizabeth, and Frances Glessner Lee on the right, with her son John Glessner Lee. In 1900, the Glessners and Keiths entered into a party wall agreement to clarify what had probably been just a verbal agreement up to that point. This was done in anticipation of the Keiths selling their home the next year to Stanley Field, nephew of Marshall Field and longtime president of the Field Museum. Field added a few windows facing into the courtyard, including a first-floor window visible at far right, covered with a window grill. By the time the Glessner House was rescued from demolition in 1966, many of the houses on Prairie Avenue had been razed. However, both the Keith and Wheeler houses were still standing to the south and being used as rooming houses. Richard Nicol took this photograph of the courtyard in 1966. We can clearly see at least 3 windows in the south wall, one on each floor. You will also notice that the Keith House wall is considerably taller than it is today, the red line indicating the approximate height of the current wall. The Wheeler and Keith houses were both seriously damaged by fire in 1968, and the Wheeler house was demolished that summer. It is not clear exactly when the Keith house was demolished, but both properties were purchased by R.R. Donnelly in December 1968 to expand parking for their employees. This image shows the site of the Keith house shortly after demolition. Remnants of the house are still visible, including plaster on portions of the walls and the stone front steps leading up to a porch that no longer exists. The demolition of the house created a crisis for Glessner House, as the loss of the north wall of Keith House would have negatively impacted the courtyard, always intended as a completely enclosed space. $11,000 was quickly secured to purchase the north wall of the Keith House, although the upper portion of the wall had to be removed. Windows were bricked in, clearly visible with the contrast between the new brick and the soot-covered original. Wood bracing was set into place to stabilize the wall, which, of course, was never intended to be freestanding, while a more permanent plan was developed. In 1970, a series of 6 12-inch steel I-beams were set into place, 22 feet apart, to provide the necessary support for the wall. A large crane was used to lower the beams into place over the wall. In these images, taken from the alley, you can still see portions of the brick wall forming the front and back of the Keith House stable. The beams were L-shaped, the lower portion of the L sitting a couple of feet underneath the present driveway and clearly seen in the trench. This portion of the beam was critical in providing adequate stability and support for the wall. For many years, the south side of the wall, which faces into the current Women's Park, was left in a fairly rough state. This provided an interesting analysis of the Keith House, with the location of brick structural walls still visible, along with the ends of the joists that had supported the first and second floors. The red arrow shows the joists for the second floor, clearly indicating how much of the upper wall was lost, including a portion of the second floor and all of the third floor. By 1999, when the full conservation and restoration of the Glessner House courtyard was undertaken, the side of the wall facing into the park was extensively renovated. Wood remnants of the joists were removed, and the brick repaired and repointed. In this view, it can be seen that the wall surface is treated in several different ways. At the east end, the granite veneer of Glessner House wrapped onto the south wall. Keith House was set back 7 feet from the front of Glessner House, as indicated by the line where the granite stops. Next, where the walls abutted each other, stucco now covers the side wall of Glessner House. Beyond that, the wall is exposed brick. At the far west end of the wall, facing the alley, the Glessner's granite extended a bit onto the back wall of the Keith House, obviously something that was agreed to at the time of construction. Ironically, 80 years later, that bit of granite was preserved when the Keith House wall was purchased and made part of the Glessner property. Looking today at the side of the wall facing into the Women's Park, there are still traces of several elements of the Keith House. Here we see the bricked-in opening of the first floor window added by Stanley Field. Next to that, this recess in the wall marks the location of the built-in sideboard in the Keith dining room. There are no known pictures of the dining room, but the right image shows fragments of the room's terracotta frieze, salvaged by Jack Simmerling and now in the Glessner House collection. Copper covers the spot where the first floor joists would have been set in place, the ledge formed by the thicker foundation wall below. A chimney, with its corbelled profile, was located in the stable of the Keith House and also remains. An interesting feature not normally visible on houses is the slate that was inserted between the limestone foundation and the brick wall. The slate served as damp-proofing, blocking moisture in the limestone foundation from traveling upward into the brick wall. We are now looking at the Glessner House side of the wall, which also reveals a few clues that this was, in fact, the wall of another house. The wall has been covered with vines ever since Francis Glessner removed pieces from their previous home in 1887 and planted them in the courtyard. When the courtyard was restored in 1999, cuttings of the ivy growing at the time were taken by the Chicago Botanic Garden, rooted, and held until they could be safely replanted after the restoration was complete. At the west end of the wall, the 5 bricked-in window openings of the Keith House stable are still clearly visible. The short basement windows were bricked in as well, and most are now completely covered by ivy. This one, at the east end of the courtyard, is still partially visible, including its elaborate wrought iron grille. We hope you have enjoyed learning more about the south wall, its historic and modern appearance, and how its rescue in the late 1960s preserved the integrity of the Glessner House courtyard. Tune in next time when another secret will be revealed.